So can we start with a prayer? Lord, things are coming back. We appreciate that. It's been a long 2 years. It's good to be back together so that we can chat and talk. So bless us. Bless us as we struggle to recover from this pandemic and all that other stuff. We're starting to read, we're in the middle of Isaiah right now, and we're going to read the Song of the Vineyard. Thank you for that great joy. So now bless us. Bless us, open our hearts and our minds so that we can fully understand what you have to say to us. These things we pray in the name of Jesus Christ, who is Lord and Savior. Amen. Okay, last week we did a lot. And I had a long, I kind of went off in different directions in my email. Any questions or comments about whatever comes to mind before we start the Song of the Vineyard? Okay, it's chapter 5. Let me sing for my beloved, my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. He expected it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. And now, inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done then? When I expected it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge. It shall be devoured. I will break down its wall. It shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed. It shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his pleasant planting. He expected justice, but saw bloodshed. Righteousness, but heard a cry. You who join house to house, who add field to field, until there's room for no one but you, and you are left to live alone in the midst of the land. The Lord of hosts has sworn in my hearing, surely many houses shall be desolate, large and beautiful houses without inhabitant. For 10 acres of vineyard shall yield but one bath, and a homer of seed shall yield a marrow ephah. You who rise early in the morning in pursuit of strong drink, who linger in the evening to be inflamed by wine, whose feast consists of lyre and harp, tambourine and fruit and wine, but who do not regard the deeds of the Lord or seek the work of his hands. Therefore my people go into exile without knowledge. Their nobles are dying of hunger, and their multitude is parched with thirst. Therefore Sheol has enlarged its appetite and opens its mouth beyond measure. The nobility of Jerusalem and her multitude go down, her throng and all who exult in her. People are bowed down and everyone is brought low, and the eyes of the haughty are humbled. But the Lord of hosts is exalted by justice. Holy One shows himself holy by righteousness. Then the lambs shall graze as in their pasture. Fatlings and kids shall feed among the ruins. Ah, you who drag iniquity along with cords of falsehood, who drag sin as with cart ropes, who say, let him make haste, let him speed his work, that we may see it. Let the plan of the Holy One of Israel hasten to fulfillment, that we may know it. Ah, you who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Ah, you who are wise in your own eyes and shrewd in your own sight. Ah, you who are heroes of drinking wine and valiant at mixing drink, who acquit the guilty for a bribe and deprive the innocent of their rights. Therefore, as the tongue of the tongue of fire devours the stubble, and as dry grass sinks down in the flame, so their root will become rotten, and their blossom go up like dust. For they have rejected the instruction of the Lord of hosts, and they have despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. Therefore, the anger of the Lord was kindled against his people, and he stretched out his hand against them and struck them, and mountains quaked, and their corpses were like refuse in the streets. For all this, his anger has not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. He will raise a signal for a nation far away, and a whistle for a people at the ends of the earth. Here they come, swiftly. None of them is weary, none stumbles, none slumbers or sleeps. Not a loincloth is loose, not a sandal tongue is broken. Their arrows are sharpened, their bows all bent. Their horses' hooves seem like flint, and their wheels like the whirlwind. Their roaring is like a lion. Their young lions, they roar, they growl and seize their prey. They carry it off, and no one can rescue. They will roar over it on that day, like the roaring of the sea. And if one looked to the land, only darkness and distress, and the light grows dark with clouds. This, brothers and sisters, is one of the more eloquent pieces of poetry in the Bible. And it is also extraordinary in its import and its message. First of all, what we're used to seeing as we've been reading Isaiah so far is a condemnation, a word of judgment, and buried in that, or at the very end, is this word of hope, this word of love, this word of support. It's always there somehow. But this is the reverse of it. It's a love song. It starts speaking about the vineyard. And then it says, what's going on? What's going on? Why has this happened? What's happened? Now, you recall that this is a period where Judah and Israel are both in crisis. The Assyrians under Tiglath-Pileser III are pushing hard into Palestine. And so things are going south very quickly. So how's Isaiah going to explain all this? Let's talk about some of the eloquence of this thing. There are some themes here. First of all, this notion about his singing about his beloved vineyard. That not only did God removed the stone. He tilled it. In the ancient world, if you had a vineyard or a field somewhere, you had to guard it. These people come and steal your harvest. Ordinarily, they put a booth out. But this was a high-quality vineyard. There's a guard tower. So he planted with choice, and he put a guard tower in it. There is an expectation here. See here in verse 2, it says, he built a watchtower in the midst of it, and hewed a vine back in it. He expected it to yield grapes. And then down here, verse 4, when he expected it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? Turn there, expected, and it's also down here in verse 7. See, for the vineyard of the host, the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Israel are his pleasant planting. He expected justice, and he saw bloodshed. Righteousness, but he heard a cry. Now, this is the repeated use of a word to bring up a metaphor that switches from wine to justice. See that? This is a powerful use of a poetic form in this. Word is kala. And down here, it's gradually in these first 8 verses of it, it switches from lamenting the lack of grapes to lamenting the lack of justice and righteousness, and it switches to why. And what's going to be the result of that? This is his people. This is his people. It's both the north and the south. This is the people are Judah and Israel both. All right. So he asks the question, what am I going to do? Verse 5. What am I going to do with this vineyard? Well, first he's going to take its hedge away, and he's going to break down its wall. This is the protection, and it will be laid waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. This notion of briars and thorns taking over cultivated land is a common theme in the prophets. And things go, when you stop cultivating the land, when you stop caring for it, it goes wild. And no more than that, he is going to stop the rains. Now, when you read throughout the Pentateuch and the prophets and the Psalms, etc., one of the things that is constantly stated is that when you go into this land of this promised land, it's going to be a land of milk and honey, but it's a land dependent upon rain. There is a perennial river in it. That's the Jordan. But they couldn't, it's not like Egypt or Mesopotamia where they could take the water from the river and use it to water the crops. Couldn't do that because the Jordan River is down about 2,000 feet. They just have the ability to pump that water up the hill. When you get down to the Jordan River level, is it's a jungle down there. There's a big ditch that the river runs through, and it's overgrown. And places like Jericho there are wells, and land is well watered and cultivated. But the rest of the land is dependent upon rain. God is the rainmaker. This is how it's regularly understood. God supplies the rain in its time. The rain comes in seasons and in different forms. But this transition of the seasons in which rain is an integral part of it is critical, because if that rain fails, people die. So God's not only is he going to reduce the protection that he's given this land. Not only is he going to do that, he's going to stop the rain. And then he says down, I want to point out another poetic norm. You see in verse 8, it says, and in 11, and 18, and 20, and 21, and 22. This word is hoy. What it is, hoy. It's a lamentation. Most other translations translate it woe. If you're reading the Revised Standard Version there, or King James or something like that, it reads woe. The New Revised Standard Version uses the term hoy, and they do it because the connotation of this verse is this is not a judgment. It's not woe to you. It's, this tragedy is going on. It's part of the grieving process that we see in this hymn. So what it tells us right down here in verse 8 is, you who join house to house and head field to field, until there's room for no one but you, and you who are left alone in the midst of the land. The Lord have hosts has sworn in my hearing, the houses shall be desolate. Verse 11, you who rise early in the morning in pursuit of strong drink, who linger in the evening to be inflamed by wine, whose feasts consist of lyre and harp and tambourine and wine, but who do not regard the deeds of the Lord. Therefore, my people go into exile without knowledge. The nobles are dying of hunger. Their multitudes are parched with hunger. Okay. Somebody had a question?
During the Holocaust, during the Holocaust, did the Jews look at this, like verse 25, where there are so many bodies like refuse in the streets? Did they take this into account, or did they ignore it, or did they have another explanation? It says it's the anger of the Lord, but survivors don't.
Now, the question is about, I think the question you're asking is, how did the Jews take to the Holocaust?
Yeah.
How did they adapt to the Holocaust?
How did they explain it to themselves? If they still believed. Most of them
How
stopped
did they
believing.
manage to believe? Is that the question you're asking?
That's it.
Many didn't. Many turned away. But they didn't turn away from being Jews.
No, they did not.
They turned away from believing in God.
in his justice.
And well, they asked the question about the justice, and it didn't seem to be there during the Holocaust. Their adaptation to it is a wonder to behold.
Say that again.
I believe their adaptation to the Holocaust is a wonder to behold. Many held on to the faith.
A remnant.
There's always a remnant, that's right. And frequently when you get a remnant like that, they are very zealous. And that's what I think we see, and particularly in Israel and in many Jewish communities. There's a core of people who are just absolutely dedicated to keeping the faith in spite of it all. The other thing they did, of course, was they just hung in there. They turned into fighters. The Jews are portrayed as going gently into the camps, but that misrepresents them and their history. In the ancient world, Jewish soldiers were hired out all over the world. A lot of the diaspora began well before the exile, when they were when other kings hired Jews as mercenaries. There was a colony in Egypt that built its own temple and remained even until after the exile. It's possible that Jeremiah went there. And you recall Masada. You may recall Masada. After the 70 AD, they destroyed Jerusalem. They headed on to Masada, which was built up on a high peak, and the Jews just fought off the Romans for years and finally died.
They killed each other.
They killed yes, we are told that the remnant killed it, what was left when they're about to be overrun and kill themselves. So they became warriors. Yes.
I keep thinking when we're reading this, how is Isaiah relaying all of these thoughts to the people? Is he kind of preaching to them, or what's happening?
Well, let me finish.
Okay, excuse me.
The Jews have done other things, of course. Things like the Holocaust Memorial, which is a stunning place to go. If you ever get a chance to go there, it's remarkable. Their insistence historically on standing for justice politically and in other places. So it's how they were adjusted. I think it's a testimony to Jewish faithfulness, personally. They're still there. Yeah. So the question you've asked, does that answer your question? Yeah, the question you've asked is how is this being transmitted to the people? Well, we know, first of all, that it was written down. We're told that. It's written down. And, in some cases, many cases, Isaiah or prophets would go to the king directly in his court and stand up and say, point the finger or do whatever he needs to do. In some cases, he was probably just in a public forum, speaking to the crowds. In some cases, we know that there were metaphorical deeds that he did, symbolic actions. we'll see that he walked naked through the streets of Jerusalem when, as a way of speaking to the people. And folks like Jeremiah, for instance, when they were under siege by the Babylonians, bought property. So, this stuff got to the people. The intent mostly was to get to the leadership. Where's the leadership? In the king's court. And when there are some who believe, and it's very plausible, after the return from the exile, some post-exilic prophets, the prophecy died out. So by the time of Jesus, the standard understanding was no more prophets. The question is why? Some have suggested it's because there's no more forum before a king. Didn't work. There's no place to go to preach.
And this is the first time I've heard it read like you did, and it really had an impact on me. I'm wondering how editorially, how did this poem come into the rest of the historical business of Isaiah?
Well, first of all, we can see in this greater poem, there are some parts of it that probably, or that may be misplaced. So they were collected during the exile, Isaiah, and in fact, all the pre-exilic prophets. Well, let me clarify this. We know there were hundreds of prophets. There were bands of prophets. There were schools of prophets. There were lots of false prophets. There were prophets everywhere. Turns out that some of them were right. Not most of them. One of the remarkable events that the Jews did during the exile, when they were in Babylon, I mean, they had all these things that were written down, and they carried them off in the exile with them. And they started reading them and going through them, and they decided that they needed to preserve them. And they started with the former, called the former and the latter prophets. Noel Freeman calls it the primary history, Genesis through 2 Kings, and also began to collect the hymns and the Proverbs and all these kinds of things. And they collected the prophets, and they selected the ones who were right. The ones they didn't listen to. That's a remarkable thing to do. And Isaiah in particular was assembled, and they put them in an order that they thought seemed right. Now, that order could have been affected by lots of things, like how much room was left on the scroll. It could have seemed like it just seemed like a good place to put it. Or these two match. In some cases, it may have been my mistake. But this song of the vineyard here, which is so powerful, was probably easily assembled. That probably was not a hard call. Some of the later parts of this, when you get past verse 18, verse 14, the editors seem to believe that they went together in this place.
Is it in rhyme or?
Pardon me?
Are there some rhymes or no? That's just the text.
It's parallelism.
Okay.
Parallelism. And it's strong here.
It's so relevant today.
Yeah.
Don't you know?
Yeah.
Let me
Scary.
let me talk about that a little bit. This down here, it says who joined house to house and who strong drink, and down here later who call evil good and who think you're wise and wrong. This goes back early. I'm going to turn to Leviticus 25, would you please? Well, I'm sorry, I got it up on the screen. This is Leviticus 25. This is they're in the desert. And this is the year of the Jubilee. You shall hallow the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land and to all its inhabitants. Does that sound familiar? Proclaim liberty throughout the land. It shall be a Jubilee year for you. You shall return, every one of you, to your property, and every one of you to your family. This is in typical fashion. They use the number of years is like 7 weeks of years, 49, every 49th year. You go through 49 years, and the 50th year is a year of Jubilee. And this is predicated on the notion that the land doesn't belong to them. If you go through the book of Joshua, and I think it starts at about verse 12, there are pages and pages of boring stuff about boundaries, about and it draws what we call a meets and bounds map, not platted. It goes from here to here to this tree to this rock to this river to that, and it divides the land amongst the 12 tribes. This division of land amongst the 12 lines is set. God set it so that to move a boundary stone is a bad thing. Well, the premise of all this is that God placed folks in these locations, but he didn't give it to them. What he did was leased it to them. Everybody got his piece of land, and that became theirs. And it became the people of Israel's as long as they kept the covenant. But each individual had a piece, and it's very detailed. Because in this year of Jubilee, right here, you shall return, every one of you, to your own property. When you make a sale of a neighbor, you shall not cheat one another. When you buy from a neighbor, you shall pay only the number of years since the Jubilee. You're buying a lease. You're not buying the property. You shall observe my statutes faithfully, keep my ordinance, so that you may live on the land securely. You shall provide, and throughout the land you hold, you shall provide for redemption of the land. If anyone kin falls into difficulty and sells a piece of property, then the next of kin can come and buy it back. They have the right to do that. If anyone sells a dwelling house, and everybody's got a chance to redeem the property that they owned in the countryside. In the city, this doesn't count. You can buy property inside a walled city in perpetuity, but not in the land. Not in the land. In villages, you can't do it. But in the cities, you can do it. And then it says if any of your kin, when the thing of property is money and power. What happens though is these folks are farmers. And just like farmers forever, they're dependent upon the weather. And so if the rains don't come, people start getting in trouble, into difficulty, and they start borrowing they start selling their land. They start selling themselves into indentured servitude. They start selling, quote, selling their land. So if anyone falls into difficulty and becomes dependent upon you, you shall support them. This is an attempt to keep people on their land. If any of you are so impoverished that they sell themselves to you, you shall not make them slaves. They shall remain as hired or bound laborers, and they shall serve you until the year of the Jubilee, and you'll let them go. The most you can be as a Jew is an indentured servant, basically. A debt servant. And then in the year of the Jubilee, you shall let them all go. If resident aliens among you prosper, and if your kin fall into any difficulty and sell themselves to a rancher, and after they have sold themselves, and they shall have the right of redemption. One of their brothers may redeem them, or their uncle, or their uncle's son. They shall. This is all key to the year of Jubilee.
Was it ever applied?
Pardon me.
Was it ever applied, the year of Jubilee? I mean, do we have traces that year was the year of Jubilee and it was redistributed in practice?
What seems to be clear is that it was ignored. Maybe symbolically stuff happened. There is a suggestion in Jeremiah. Jeremiah, 100 years later, they were in really deep yogurt because the Babylonians were coming, and everybody's, we're going to reform and make themselves right. I can't recall the passages that suggest this right now. So that they pledged to the Jubilee year. I can't remember the passage, but Noel Friedman, my advisor, says that what happened is that they reneged. They reneged on it. They did it for show. But when push came to shove, to actually transfer the deeds of the land, they didn't do it. Which increased their jeopardy. The truth is that this was ignored and more property became the exclusive domain of individuals. Right? Verse 8. You who join house to house, who add field to field, until there's room for no one but you, and you are left alone in the midst of the land. The Lord of hosts has sworn in my hearing, surely many houses shall be desolate, large and beautiful houses without inhabitant. For 10 acres of vineyard shall yield but one bath, and a homer of seed shall yield a mere ephah. The accumulation of wealth is what it was the basic problem. Talk about contemporary issues. People would buy land, and they would buy the land in between, and everybody was squeezed out. By Jesus' time, almost all land, most land, particularly in the Galilee, was held by large landowners. And these were corporate farmers, basically. They're absentee landlords. And they needed to do it because of the rise of the urbanization of the region. So you got this big city there. Big cities depended upon food, and the food comes from the region. And as it becomes more important to the city, and these farms get bought out, and so it becomes more efficient to farm it and ship it into the city. That's how this accumulation of wealth happened. And it's a problem. It may be the fundamental problem, social problem. But there are any questions about this? This is extraordinarily important for us to understand. And it is a permanent problem throughout the world. For those who hold the Bible in esteem, they need to go back and read this. Because by ignoring the year of the Jubilee and what it stood for, the effect of it is all the land becomes parceled out to a few. Land is power, land is wealth, land is money. No.
So wealth that begets power diminishes justice.
Isn't
That a connection?
I think so. You get lobbyists who lobby for their own good.
Yeah, we are so much in the middle. I mean, these are so actual text. I mean, they speak to nowadays.
Don't you know?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think Isaiah might interpret what we're living in the pandemic and all that as a sign. Wake up, guys! I mean, wake up call. And what we have is climate change. It should be wake up call.
Let's go through the ahs. Verse 10. Rise early in the morning and pursue strong drink. Later in the evening to be inflamed by wine. And whose feast consists of lyre and harp, tambourine and flute and wine. There seems to be a significant number of people for whom that is how they lived. Therefore, my people go into exile. Verse 14, therefore, Sheol has enlarged its appetite. Death is opening its mouth.
Is Sheol another word for hell?
No,
No, it's
death,
death.
death, the grave.
Okay.
Sheol,
I'm sorry, I just want to go back. So
say that again.
Ephah was a measure of quantity, right?
Say that again.
Ephah was a measure of quantity, right?
An ephah, yeah,
Yeah, I
that's
just want to
right.
go back
The
to that.
ephah and the bath are measures of volume, quantity. It's like a bushel. Some's a bushel, and so whatever. These yields are very small for that amount of property.
Like a peck,
Pardon me?
like a peck. Not a bushel, but a peck.
Yeah, something like that. And therefore Sheol there's going to be a lot of death, including the nobility, and the people are bowed down in verse 15. But the Lord, in verse 16, the Lord of hosts is exalted by justice. The holy God shows himself holy by righteousness. Then the lambs shall graze in their pasture, and fatlings and kids shall feed among the broods. If you look at the footnote there in verse 17, incidentally, where it says kids, the Hebrew says alien. Fatlings and aliens. We've seen favorability to the aliens throughout the prophets in Isaiah. But this goes with the Greek, and they chose that obviously from the parallelism. That is to say, the interpreters, those who interpreted the New Revised Standard Version with fatling rather than alien. It's a better match, but who knows what originally said. This is the kind of thing where 200 BC, the rabbis were trying to figure this out. And maybe they came down to this and said, fatlings, fatlings, aliens? It's fatlings and kids. And so they just translate it that way. And the text is more flexible than we would like to think. Okay, so in verse 18, you who drag iniquity and drag sin, you who say to your worker now, let him make haste, let him speed his work that we may see it. Let the plan of the Holy One of Israel hasten to fulfillment that we may know it. This kind of plan of the Holy One of Israel is the day of the Lord. And then this, verse 20, you who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. You who are wise in your own eyes and shrewd in your own sight, heroes in drinking wine and valiant at mixing of drink, who acquit the guilty for a bribe and deprive the innocent of their rights.
Talking about prophetic. We're living through this.
Pardon me?
As to talk about prophetic, we live through this.
I don't know what to say, folks. That's the way I read it. Some folks believe this is the way it's supposed to be. Now, they don't say it this way. Here's the problem. You know, just the really bad thing, the really critical part here is in verse 20, I think. Call evil good and good evil, darkness for light and light for darkness, bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. That is, look at something and say, that's not what you think it is, it's something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, for those people who are willing to accept that as something else, why? I mean, if it looks like it's dark, if it looks like it's light, and you look and say, no, it's dark. Or if it's sweet and you taste bitter, but the bitter is really sweet. How does that happen?
Self-interest.
Ed,
Yes.
this reminds me of today. This reminds me of smoke and mirrors, where you hear, for example, immigration, how it's bad and it's good. And you don't know where to weigh in at because you have two different thoughts going on pretty much anything that comes up there. You know, I mean, this is so typically Democrats, Republicans. Whoa.
Yeah, I think you're right on, buddy. I think we all see this here. Our problem is trying to figure out how it is that people can see one thing and say it's something else.
Yeah.
What allows that to happen? What inside us drives it? I believe
Incurvatus in se, curved in upon oneself, is a Reformation principle. That's our problem, sin, curved in upon our own selves.
We want to see what feels good. And we all do it. Look, folks, I don't watch Fox News. I watch MSNBC, right? I don't watch Fox News because I just go, I see it. But that's uncomfortable. I don't want to waste my time watching that kind of stuff. We all do it one way or another.
Sometimes I watch it just to see where the craziness is headed.
But even that, see, is a bias that cuts out whatever truth there is in Fox News.
Yeah.
Right.
See, therein lies the problem, is that we put up a filter of some kind that changes things, shapes and colors and what we want.
Perspective.
And that,
Blinds us.
there are all kinds of ways that we can live with exceptions. We can live with, well, yes, but that doesn't apply to me. We do it all the time. And to me, this self-deception is scary. It's scary to me personally, because I sometimes wonder whether what I'm doing is not just what I want to do.
Ed, could you go back to what you were saying? You were reading the text and you said, I believe. And I'd like to hear what you believe. I always like to hear what you believe. Was it about you and what you think?
Which one?
About, you told us a lot because I've asked you so many times what you believe.
Yeah,
And I treasure that a lot. I really like to hear that.
I try not to do that too much. And when I do it, I want to put a very clear statement. This is my thought. This is what I believe. And sometimes I reach conclusions about what the text says, and I try very hard to say, this is what I conclude. Right? So that you can question that. This is not the gospel coming out of my mouth. This is my opinion and my interpretation. And you need to have not only the permission, but I urge you to challenge it. But I need to be very clear about things sometimes when I say, I believe this, as I did in my writing. This is what I believe about certain things. So that you have freedom to believe what you want to believe. So,
Sometimes I wonder, when you're telling us what you believe, I would like it paralleled with what Presbyterians as a religion are told to believe.
yeah, I try to do that sometimes as well. Sometimes what I do is, it's quite heresy. Incidentally, my statement about the virgin birth, right? One of the 7 parts of the Reformed plank is believing in the virgin birth.
It's in the Nicene Creed, which we.
And so when I said, can you be a Christian and not believe in the virgin birth? And somebody said, oh, yes. But the difficulty is I went through, I didn't say I should have. I went through decades, centuries of Christian theology and said, well, maybe yes. Except the truth is that I know a lot of Christians don't believe in the virgin birth. I know a lot of Christians don't seem to believe in the resurrection, which I find hard to understand. But that's a reason.
There's one minor part that you told us you believe. And I want to know if it's the Episcopal Creed. You said that if we believe that Jesus believed he was dying for our sins, but what if we believe that Jesus died for our sins, even if we think Jesus at the time said, God, why are you so forsaking me?
This is one of those things, most people say Jesus was fully, the standard there is that Jesus was fully knowledgeable about all he was doing. He was, he knew everything, right? I personally don't believe that. I believe he didn't fully understand what was going to happen and how it was going to happen. And that's why he cried out on the cross, why did you forsake me? That's when he became fully human. He didn't know. That's what I think. But that's purely my opinion. That's just how I put it together.
Well, and yet he said several times in the Gospels, this is what's going to happen to me in Jerusalem.
That's right. He did.
But he also said he was going to come back while they were still alive.
Yeah. Whoops.
That could refer to the resurrection.
Pardon me?
That could refer to the resurrection, what you just say. Yeah, okay.
Okay,
Well, you know, Ed, it just seems to me there are all sorts of things that we cannot understand. So you already know my philosophy. I just gotta try to do the best I can.
we gotta trust. And one of the victims of a higher critical method of interpreting the Bible is the loss of mystery. That we set ourselves out to figure it all out with a pencil. And there's no sense of the mysterium tremendum, that sense of awe and not understanding.
But isn't the bottom line our own will to do this or that? Sometimes it's not based on belief, it's how we act in spite of what we doubt.
There are all kinds of factors. I think it's my belief, there's a transcendent reality that we cannot, by definition, come to understand. And I believe it plays itself out in Christianity, and I can tell it's there when I come across two things that are irreconcilable. Paradox. And it's kind of like the wings over the covenant, the Ark of the Covenant. God's in the middle. I think the space in the paradox, the space in Jesus being fully God and fully man, the space between what's happening with God and that God is in that paradox. That's the space that fills it up. And I try my hardest to figure things out. Bottom line, when it comes down to it. Well, this is how it worked itself out, I think. When I first started in this biblical studies thing, studying the Old Testament, I can remember taking a course and it was about the Exodus and giving all these explanations about how they crossed the Red Sea, and the sea parted and all this stuff. And I was going into all these theories about the tides and the winds and all this kind of stuff, how this could actually have happened. And years later, I found that that's not that's helpful in comprehending what went on. But bottom line, God is, and God does. For me, that's period. So if it's a miracle, it's a miracle. Let me finish here. Go back to 26, verse 26. He shall raise a signal for a nation far away and whistle for a people at the ends of the earth. Here they come, swiftly, speedily. And this is an army. God is calling for an army to come in and clean this place up. And this is the Assyrian army. And this, what we know about from history is that this Assyrian army was really good. Really good. They did a lot of, when they besieged a town and conquered it, period. When they knew how to do it, they had siege engines and they were just like the Romans. And they were vicious and they were brutal and they succeeded. So they were very effective. And you can see it here. They're coming fast. No one stumbles. no one stumbles, sleeps, and don't break even a shoelace. And the arrows are sharp, bows are bent, horses swooping like flint, wheels like a whirlwind, roaring like a lion, seize their prey and carry it off. They will roar, on verse 30, they will roar over it on that day like the roaring of the sea. And if no one looked to the land, only darkness and distress, and the light grows dark with clouds. This on that day is the day of the Lord. See what's happened here? The day of the Lord's getting shifted from something good that we saw presumed in Amos to the day when God sends the armies of Assyria in to muck out this place. Remnant shall remain. No remnant shall remain. Okay, folks, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You got my notes. I will not be here on the 7th.
That's just not permissible.
And we will not meet Thanksgiving Sunday. We never do. So,